Today is Friday, July 31st, 2026, and today is National Talk in an Elevator Day, which is bold, because most elevator culture is built around everyone silently agreeing to stare at the numbers and pretend we are not standing 12 inches from strangers. Nobody really teaches you elevator etiquette. You just learn it. Face forward. Don't make it weird. And whatever you do, don't start a full conversation between floors 3 and 4. Unless you're prepared to become the most memorable person in the building. But I do like the idea of one day where we all briefly admit, yes, this is awkward. We're all in a moving closet together. We might as well say hello. And oddly enough, today gives us a few moments where people found themselves in situations that were definitely not normal. First, we'll climb one of the most dangerous mountains on Earth, where reaching the summit became a national triumph. Then we'll meet a battleship that survived Pearl Harbor, war, atomic bomb tests, and still somehow had to be sunk on purpose. And finally, we'll follow a teenage French aristocrat who crossed an ocean, joined the American Revolution, and became a major general without pay. Welcome to Wait, That's Random, This Day in History. I'm C.L. Burns, voice actor, audiobook narrator, and a person who keeps discovering that history is somehow both fascinating and deeply concerning at the same time. Most people know Mount Everest. Everest has the name recognition. It has the tallest mountain in the world title. It has the postcards, the documentaries, the bucket lists, and the kind of fame that makes even people who have never owned hiking boots know exactly what it is. K2 is different. K2 is the second highest mountain on Earth, which sounds like the kind of thing that should make it slightly less intimidating. It does not. Among climbers, K2 has a reputation that feels almost personal. It rises into the Karakoram Range, sharp and severe, along the border region of Pakistan and China. It is not a mountain that looks inviting. It looks like the planet built a warning sign out of ice, rock, wind, and altitude. There is no easy side, no gentle walk-up route, no feeling that the mountain is willing to meet you halfway. Everest may be higher, but K2 has long carried a darker nickname, the Savage Mountain. That name is dramatic, but when you look at what climbers face there, you understand why it's stuck. The weather can change violently. The slopes are steep. The air is thin. The margin of error is tiny. And when something goes wrong that high on a mountain, there may be no quick rescue, no easy way down, and no comforting backup plan. For decades, K2 resisted climbers. Expeditions tried and failed. Men pushed higher, turned back, froze, suffered, argued, and learned the mountain one brutal lesson at a time. Then came the Italian expedition of 1954. The climb was led by Ardito Desio, and the expedition carried the weight of a national ambition. This was not just a group of people taking a difficult hike. Italy wanted the K2. The mountain had become a prize, a test, and a symbol of human endurance. But mountains do not care about national pride. They do not care about flags. They do not care how badly anyone wants the summit. K2 simply stood there and made everyone prove it. The final push came on July 31st, 1954. They climbed into a world where the air itself was failing them. Every step took effort. Every decision mattered. The summit was close enough to imagine and still far enough to kill them. And then, finally, they reached the top. For the first time in history, human beings stood on the summit of K2. The world's second highest mountain had been climbed. That sentence sounds clean. Almost too clean. K2 was climbed, but nothing about it was simple. By the time a summit moment reaches a history book, it can sound like a finish line. Someone climbed, someone arrived, someone planted a flag. Done. But the actual experience is much messier. There is exhaustion, fear, cold, altitude, arguments, risk, and the knowledge that reaching the summit is only half the job, because the mountain is not finished with you until you make it back down. That's one of the things I find fascinating about mountaineering history. From the outside, we tend to focus on the top. Who got there first? What date? What height? What record? But on the mountain, the summit is not the whole story. It is a moment. A dangerous, breathtaking, almost impossible moment. And then, you still have to survive the descent. That is why K2 feels different from a simple achievement story. It is not just about reaching something high. It is about human beings deciding to step into a place where nature has almost every advantage and trying anyway. And maybe that's why the first descent still carries such force, because the mountain did not become less dangerous afterward. It did not become friendly. It did not become conquered in the ordinary sense of the word. K2 was still K2. But on July 31st, 1954, 2 climbers stood on top of it, and the impossible became something people had done. And from a mountain that seemed almost impossible to conquer, we moved to a ship that seemed almost impossible to sink. The USS Nevada was launched in the early 20th century, but its most famous chapter began on December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor. When Japanese aircraft attacked the U.S. Pacific Fleet, Nevada was there. Many ships were hit. Many were trapped. But Nevada did something extraordinary. It got underway. That alone made it stand out. During the attack, the battleship began moving, trying to escape the harbor while bombs and torpedoes were still falling. Imagine that scene. Smoke everywhere, fire on the water, ships burning, aircraft overhead. Men scrambling to fight fires, man guns, rescue shipmates, and somehow keep the vessel alive. Nevada was hit repeatedly. A torpedo struck her. Bombs damaged her. And eventually, to keep the damaged ship from sinking in a place where it could block the harbor channel, she was deliberately run aground. That could have been the end. For many ships, it would have been. But Nevada was raised, repaired, and sent back to war. She went on to support major operations across the Atlantic and Pacific. Normandy, southern France, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. By the end of World War II, the ship had already lived through more than most vessels ever would. But Nevada's strange afterlife was not finished. After the war, she was chosen as a target ship for atomic bomb tests at Bikini Atoll. And because history occasionally sounds like it was written by someone trying to make a battleship into a stubborn old movie character, Nevada was painted bright orange to make her easier to identify from the air. A battleship, painted orange, waited for an atomic bomb. That is already a sentence that does not feel real. In July of 1946, Nevada was used in Operation Crossroads, a series of atomic tests meant to study what nuclear weapons would do to ships. The first test was an airburst. Nevada survived. The second was an underwater explosion. Nevada survived that too. Damaged, contaminated, no longer truly usable in any normal way, but still afloat. At some point, you almost imagine the Navy looking at this ship and thinking, what exactly is it going to take? Pearl Harbor had not sunk her permanently. War had not finished her. Atomic bomb tests had not sent her to the bottom. Finally, on July 31st, 1941, the USS Nevada was sunk as a target off Hawaii. That was the end of the ship. But even that ending feels less like defeat and more like the final chapter of a vessel that had refused to cooperate with history's attempts to write her off. The Nevada was not just metal, guns, armor, and engines. By then, she had become a witness to Pearl Harbor, a witness to the war that followed, a witness to the beginning of the atomic age, and finally, a witness to the strange way nations sometimes dispose of machines that help carry them through history. K2 stood there daring people to climb it. Nevada stayed afloat through things that should have ended her. And both remind us that some parts of history are memorable not because they were easy to explain, but because they made you stop and ask how they all happened at all. And then, July 31st gives us someone who looked at a war an ocean away and somehow decided, yes, that's where I should be. Which is a pretty bold thought at any age, but especially at 19. On July 31st, 1777, the Marquis de Lafayette, accepted a commission as a major general in the Continental Army, without pay. Now, that sentence has a lot going on. First, Lafayette was a French aristocrat. And I'm not even going to try to pronounce most of these words, but his full name was Marie-Joseph Paul Yves Roche Gilbert de Montier, Marquis de Lafayette, which is already enough name for at least 3 people. Second, he was only 19 years old. At 19, most people are still figuring out basic life skills, like how to do laundry without turning everything a suspicious shade of gray. Lafayette was crossing the Atlantic to join a revolution, and not his own revolution. The American colonies were fighting Britain, and Lafayette became fascinated by the cause. He saw the American Revolution as something larger than a distant political argument. To him, it represented liberty, self-government, and the possibility that people might build a country around principles instead of inherited power. That is the romantic version. The practical version was much messier. The Continental Army did not exactly have a shortage of problems. It needed money, supplies, training, discipline, experience, everything. And suddenly here comes a teenage French nobleman, full of enthusiasm, asking to serve. If you were in Congress, you might not know what to do with him. On one hand, he was young and inexperienced. On the other hand, he was connected to France, and France was exactly the kind of powerful ally the American cause desperately needed. So Lafayette was given the rank of Major General, but without pay. Which feels like Congress saying, we're interested, but let's not get carried away. Still, Lafayette did not treat the title like a decorative honor. He wanted to serve. He wanted to prove himself. And over time, he did. George Washington grew close to him, and Lafayette became one of the most famous foreign volunteers of the American Revolution. He was wounded at the Battle of Brandywine. He helped build support for the American cause in France. And by the time the war reached its decisive final phase, he was no longer just an eager teenager with a grand idea. He had become part of the story. And that's what I like about this moment. It sounds ridiculous at first. A 19-year-old French aristocrat becomes a major general in the Continental Army without pay. It sounds like the setup to a joke. But then you follow it forward, and the strange little beginning becomes something much more important. Lafayette's involvement helped connect the American Revolution to the wider world. He became a bridge between America and France, between youthful idealism and military reality, between an idea about liberty and the complicated work of trying to make it real. And that is one of the things July 31st kept circling back to. Not in a forced way, just quietly. A mountain that looked impossible until someone reached the top. A battleship that keeps surviving things that should have ended it. A young man who stepped into a revolution and somehow became exactly the kind of ally history would remember. Along the way, we also celebrate the birthday of J.K. Rowling, born on July 31st, 1965. And yes, I know we have had a lot of books and writers lately, but this one fits today in a different way. Because before Harry Potter became a global phenomenon, before the films, theme parks, midnight book releases, costumes, fan theories, and kids waiting impatiently for the next volume, it began as an idea in one writer's mind. A boy wizard. A hidden school, a world tucked just behind the ordinary one. That is part of what made the books work so well. They took familiar places, trains, schools, letters, shops, family homes, and quietly suggested that maybe the world was stranger than it looked. Maybe there was magic just out of sight. Maybe the ordinary world had another layer. And that is a powerful idea for a reader, especially a young reader. Because childhood already feels like that sometimes. Adults appear to understand the rules. Doors are closed. Conversations stop when you enter the room. There are systems you don't fully understand yet. And then a book comes along and says, actually, the hidden world might be the interesting one. Whether you discovered those books as a kid, read them with your own kids, watch the movies, or simply watch the cultural wave from a distance, it's hard to deny the scale of what happened. A story that began in imagination became something millions of people shared. And that may be the best reason to include Rowling today. Because July 31st has been full of things that seemed almost too large from the outside. K2, the USS Nevada, the American Revolution, a fictional world that grew until it became part of real culture. What struck me today is how often history remembers the people who stepped into something bigger than themselves. A climber steps onto a mountain. A crew fights to keep a ship alive. A teenager crosses the ocean for a revolution. A writer builds a doorway into another world. None of them could fully know what would come next. And maybe that's the part I like most. History is full of moments where someone enters the elevator, so to speak, and instead of staring silently at the numbers, they actually do something. Anyway, the next time I find myself in an elevator with strangers, I probably still won't start a conversation. Let's not pretend I'm suddenly becoming that person. But I may at least think about Lafayette, because apparently some people see an awkward situation, a dangerous situation, or a wildly unlikely situation and decide, sure, I'll step in. And that reminds me of a line attributed to Lafayette. Humanity has won its battle. Liberty now has a country. If you'd like to hear more of my work or see other corners of the internet I've been quietly building things in, you can head over to waitthat'srandom.com. I'm C.L. Burns. Thanks for hanging out with me for a few minutes. I'll see you tomorrow.